The Festival of Unity had transformed New Kepler's Grand Plaza into a celebration of peaceful coexistence between human colonists and the indigenous silent people, with traditional music weaving through crowds that represented the galaxy's most successful example of interspecies cooperation. Dr. Marcus Reed stood at the edge of the anthropological observation area, his academic credentials granting him privileged access to document cultural practices that would influence colonial policy throughout the sector. The plaza buzzed with the cheerful chaos of shared celebration, humans and Silons mingling with the easy familiarity that had developed over 15 years of successful cultural integration. Children of both species played together while their parents exchanged gifts and participated in ceremonies that blended traditions from two worlds into something uniquely collaborative. The choosing of the blessed represents the most sacred aspect of Silon spiritual tradition, explained Dr. Elena Vasquez, the colonial cultural liaison, as she guided Marcus toward the ceremony's central platform. Selected children receive advanced religious education that preserves ancient knowledge for future generations. Marcus nodded while adjusting his recording equipment, though his anthropological training made him notice details that casual observers might miss. The Silent elders conducting the ceremony moved with mechanical precision rather than the joyful spontaneity that characterized most festival activities. "How many children are typically selected?" he asked, reviewing his notes on previous ceremonies. "Usually between 6 and 10, depending on the community's spiritual needs. The selection process involves complex divination rituals that identify children with particular aptitude for advanced spiritual instruction." The ceremony began with Elder Kethmani ascending the platform, his elaborate robes glittering with traditional Silent ceremonial jewelry that caught the plaza's artificial lighting. The crowd fell silent as he began speaking in formal Silent, his words carrying the harmonic undertones that marked sacred language. Marcus listened carefully, his 2 years of linguistic study allowing him to follow most of the elders' pronouncement. The translation being provided for human audiences described spiritual blessings and religious honor, though something about the elders' actual words seemed slightly different from the rendered interpretation. "The sacred spirits have chosen their vessels," Elder Kethmani declared, his voice carrying clearly through the plaza's acoustic enhancement systems. 8 young souls will ascend to higher service, blessed with opportunities that transcend mortal understanding. The translation felt accurate, though Marcus noticed that the silent phrase for higher service could also mean departure for distant purposes, depending on contextual interpretation. 8 silent children stepped forward from the crowd, their ages ranging from perhaps 6 to 10 years old by human estimation. They wore simple white robes that marked them as candidates for selection, though Marcus noticed that most seemed subdued rather than excited about potential spiritual honor. "Lisa of the Moonhaven clan," Elder Kethmani announced, gesturing toward a small girl whose silver-flecked skin and pointed ears marked her as typical of the Silent people. "The spirits have chosen you for blessed instruction." Marcus watched the girl's reaction closely, his anthropological training making him sensitive to nonverbal communication across cultural boundaries. Lisa's expression showed what appeared to be genuine fear rather than the joy or solemnity he would expect from someone receiving religious honor. Her small hands trembled as she approached the elder, and Marcus noticed that other silent children in the crowd avoided making eye contact with the selected candidates. The behavior seemed inconsistent with a ceremony celebrating spiritual blessing. "Is it normal for the children to seem frightened?" Marcus asked Dr. Vasquez quietly. "Religious ceremonies can be overwhelming for young minds," she replied diplomatically. "The magnitude of spiritual responsibility often creates anxiety even when children understand the honor they're receiving." The explanation sounded reasonable, though Marcus's academic instincts suggested there might be more complexity to the children's reactions than simple ceremonial nervousness. Elder Kethmani continued his selections, choosing 7 more children with the same methodical efficiency. Each selection followed identical patterns: formal announcement, the child's reluctant approach to the platform, and brief blessing in ceremonial language that the human translators rendered as spiritual instruction. "The blessed ones will depart tomorrow for advanced instruction," the elder announced as the ceremony concluded. "Their families are honored by this selection, and the community celebrates their spiritual advancement." Marcus made careful notes about the timeline, though something about the rapid departure schedule seemed unusual for religious education that was supposedly long-term and local. "Where exactly do the children go for this instruction?" he asked Dr. Vasquez as the crowd began dispersing. "Sacred institutions maintained by the silent spiritual community. The locations are kept confidential to preserve the sanctity of religious education, though families receive regular updates on their children's progress." "Have any human observers visited these institutions?" "Cultural sensitivity protocols limit human access to sacred silent sites. We respect their religious autonomy by avoiding interference with traditional practices." Marcus watched the 8 selected children being led away by ceremonial attendants, noting that Lisa looked back toward the crowd with an expression that seemed more like desperate pleading than spiritual fulfillment. "Dr. Vasquez," he said carefully, "would it be possible for me to interview some families whose children participated in previous selections? Comparative analysis of spiritual development outcomes would provide valuable academic data. I'll check with the Cultural Protocol Office, though such interviews might require extensive approval processes to ensure cultural sensitivity." As the festival continued around them, Marcus found himself troubled by details that didn't align with his anthropological understanding of religious ceremonies. The children's fear, the mechanical nature of the selection process, and the immediate departure timeline all suggested complexity that deserved closer academic examination. That evening, he reviewed his recordings and notes, cross-referencing linguistic patterns with his previous research on silent spiritual practices. The elders' actual words contained nuances that weren't reflected in the official translations, though the discrepancies might simply represent the difficulty of rendering alien religious concepts in human language. Still, Marcus's academic training had taught him to investigate when cultural practices seemed inconsistent with their described purposes. Tomorrow, he would begin the research that would either confirm the ceremony's spiritual significance or reveal complications that no one wanted to acknowledge. The Colonial Research Institute's archives contained 15 years of documentation about silent religious practices, though Marcus discovered that records about the choosing of the blessed were surprisingly sparse for such an important cultural tradition. Most entries consisted of brief administrative notes confirming that ceremonies had occurred, with minimal detail about the spiritual institutions where selected children supposedly received advanced religious education. Access to detailed records requires clearance from the Cultural Sensitivity Board, explained archivist Janet Morrison when Marcus requested more comprehensive documentation. Silent religious practices are protected under the non-interference accords, so research access involves extensive approval processes. Marcus submitted the required forms while beginning analysis of publicly available materials, his anthropological training making him focus on patterns that might reveal cultural significance beyond surface descriptions. What he found troubled him. According to administrative records, he told Dr. Vasquez during their morning briefing, 43 children have been selected for blessed instruction over the past 5 years, but there's no documentation of communication between these children and their families after departure. Spiritual instruction often requires separation from worldly influences, Dr. Vasquez replied, reviewing her own files about silent customs. Many human religious traditions include similar practices for advanced theological education. But complete communication cutoff seems extreme, especially for children as young as 6 years old. Most monastic traditions allow some family contact, even when emphasizing spiritual focus. Marcus, we have to be careful about imposing human cultural expectations on alien practices. What seems extreme to us might represent normal spiritual development within silent tradition. Marcus nodded, though his linguistic analysis was revealing discrepancies that extended beyond cultural differences. I've been reviewing recordings of Elder Kethmani's pronouncements from yesterday's ceremony. The silent phrases he used don't translate directly to religious instruction, as the official interpreter suggested. Explain the difference. The elder spoke of preparation for distant service and fulfillment of higher obligations. Those phrases could refer to spiritual development, but they could also indicate something more practical, training for specific duties rather than general religious education. Dr. Vasquez looked uncomfortable with the direction of Marcus's analysis. Are you suggesting that our translators are deliberately misrepresenting silent ceremonial language? I'm suggesting that translation involves interpretation, and complex religious concepts might be rendered in ways that emphasize cultural harmony rather than literal accuracy. That sounds dangerously close to accusing our cultural liaison team of deception. Marcus realized he was approaching territory that could compromise his research access and colonial standing. I'm not accusing anyone of deliberate deception. I'm noting that linguistic analysis reveals complexity that might deserve closer academic examination. What kind of examination? Interviews with families of previously selected children. Direct observation of the spiritual institutions where religious instruction occurs. Comparative analysis of outcomes for children who've completed their advanced education. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her expression showing the conflict between academic curiosity and institutional caution. Marcus, such research could be interpreted as questioning the legitimacy of silent religious practices. The colonial administration takes cultural sensitivity violations very seriously. Academic research isn't cultural violation if conducted respectfully and with appropriate permissions. But research that implies silent religious leaders are misrepresenting their own traditions could destabilize 15 years of successful human-silent cooperation. Marcus spent the afternoon attempting to locate families of children selected during previous ceremonies, using colony demographic records to identify parents whose children had participated in blessed instruction programs. What he discovered was both puzzling and disturbing. The family records show interesting patterns, he told Dr. Vasquez that evening. Parents of selected children receive substantial material compensation following their children's departure. Food allocations, housing upgrades, and resource credits that significantly exceed normal community assistance levels. Spiritual honor often includes community support for blessed families. That seems consistent with religious tradition. Except the compensation level suggests transaction rather than honor. Some families receive resources equivalent to several years of colonial assistance payments. What are you implying? I'm noting that economic incentives accompanying religious selection create patterns that might warrant academic investigation. Dr. Vasquez looked increasingly uncomfortable with Marcus's research direction. Are you suggesting that silent families are selling their children disguised as religious tradition? I'm suggesting that economic patterns surrounding the ceremony deserve analysis to understand their cultural significance within silent society. Marcus, you're walking into territory that could trigger diplomatic incidents. If you're wrong about this, you'll be expelled from the colony for cultural interference. If you're right, the implications could destroy human-silent relations. That night, Marcus reviewed his data while considering the risks of continued investigation. His anthropological training demanded thorough research when cultural practices seemed inconsistent with their described purposes, but Dr. Vasquez's warnings about diplomatic consequences were equally valid. The breakthrough came when he accessed transport scheduling records that were publicly available but rarely cross-referenced with ceremony dates. The colony's outbound transport ships show interesting passenger patterns, he noted in his research log. Every ship departure following a choosing ceremony includes passengers listed as cultural exchange participants traveling under silent diplomatic credentials. The timing was too consistent to be coincidental. Children selected during religious ceremonies were departing New Kepler within days of their selection, traveling off-world under classifications that prevented detailed scrutiny of their identities or destinations. Marcus realized that whatever was happening to selected children, it wasn't local religious education. The spiritual institution supposedly providing advanced instruction didn't exist on New Kepler, the children were being taken somewhere else entirely. The question was whether their departure represented legitimate religious practice conducted off-world, or something else disguised as cultural tradition. Marcus's attempt to locate Lisa's family led him through the winding paths of New Kepler's silent residential district, where traditional dwellings built from local materials created organic harmony with the planet's natural landscape. However, the address listed in colony records led to an empty dwelling with signs of recent but hasty departure. The Moonhaven clan relocated yesterday for spiritual reflection, explained neighbor Velterra when Marcus asked about Lisa's family. Such moves are common when children receive blessed selection. Families need solitude to process the honor of their child's spiritual advancement. Marcus nodded politely while noting that Velterra's explanation sounded rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Do you know where they've gone for this reflection period? Sacred meditation sites maintained by the spiritual community. The locations are kept private to preserve sanctity of religious contemplation. Have you known other families who've undergone similar reflection periods? Velterra's expression became guarded, her pointed ears twitching with what Marcus had learned to recognize as silent nervousness. All blessed families follow traditional practices. It is not appropriate for community members to discuss details of other families' spiritual journeys. The conversation felt increasingly artificial, as if Velterra was reciting approved responses rather than sharing personal knowledge. Marcus thanked her politely and continued his investigation through official channels. I need to review transport passenger lists for ships departing New Kepler in the past week, he told Colonial Administrator Williams during his afternoon appointment. That information requires security clearance for access, Williams replied, consulting his terminal with bureaucratic efficiency. May I ask the purpose of your research request? Anthropological analysis of silent cultural practices. I'm investigating travel patterns associated with religious ceremonies to understand the scope of traditional spiritual education programs. Dr. Reed, transport passenger information involves privacy considerations that extend beyond academic research. Such data access requires approval from multiple departments, including cultural affairs and colonial security. Marcus felt frustration mounting as each avenue of investigation encountered procedural obstacles that seemed designed to prevent exactly the kind of research he was attempting. Administrator Williams, my research involves understanding silent cultural practices that are supposedly public religious traditions. Why does documentation of public ceremonies require security clearance? Because human observation of silent religious practices must be balanced against cultural sensitivity protocols. Your research methodology could be interpreted as invasive scrutiny of protected cultural activities. I'm asking for passenger manifests, not classified military information. Passenger manifests involving silent diplomatic travel fall under cultural protection statutes. Such information cannot be shared without extensive approval processes designed to prevent cultural interference. Marcus left the administrator's office with growing certainty that institutional obstacles weren't coincidental. Someone didn't want researchers examining the details of what happened to selected children after they left the ceremony platform. That evening, he received an encrypted message from an unexpected source, Senior Archivist Morrison, who had initially denied him access to detailed ceremony records. Dr. Reed, please meet me at the Botanical Gardens tomorrow at 0800. Come alone. There are aspects of your research that require discussion outside official channels. The message was deleted automatically after Marcus read it, leaving him with 24 hours to consider whether his investigation was uncovering academic inconsistencies or something more dangerous. The Botanical Gardens provided neutral ground where casual conversation wouldn't attract institutional attention. Morrison arrived precisely on time, carrying a coffee that suggested their meeting would require sustained discussion. Dr. Reed, your research requests have triggered security alerts that indicate you're investigating matters beyond standard anthropological study, she said without preamble. Before you continue, you need to understand the risks involved. What risks? The risks of discovering that some cultural practices aren't what they appear to be, and that questioning those practices could result in academic censure, colonial expulsion, or worse. Marcus felt his pulse increase as Morrison's warnings confirmed his growing suspicions. Are you saying that choosing ceremonies involves something other than religious education? I'm saying that certain administrative records are classified not for cultural sensitivity, but for security reasons that extend beyond New Kepler's colonial boundaries. Meaning that if you continue this investigation, you'll discover information that powerful people have invested considerable effort in keeping hidden. Such discoveries tend to be dangerous for the people who make them. Morrison handed him a data chip containing files that weren't supposed to exist. Transport records, communication logs, and financial transaction data related to post-ceremony departures. Review the information carefully, and then decide whether academic curiosity is worth the personal risks involved. Why are you helping me? Because 43 children have disappeared over 5 years, and everyone in the colonial administration pretends it's normal religious practice. Someone needs to document what's actually happening, even if that documentation proves professionally dangerous. Marcus returned to his quarters and reviewed Morrison's data with growing horror. The transport records showed children departing New Kepler under false diplomatic credentials, traveling to destinations throughout the sector that had no connection to Cylon religious institutions. Communication logs revealed payment authorizations between off-world accounts and colony officials, with transaction amounts that suggested systematic corruption rather than cultural support. Most damning were intercepted communications between Elder Kethmani and individuals identified only as collection coordinators, discussing delivery schedules, quality assessments, and pricing negotiations that treated children as commodities rather than spiritual students. The choosing of the blessed wasn't religious ceremony. It was systematic child trafficking disguised as cultural tradition, with colonial officials accepting bribes to ignore obvious signs of exploitation. Marcus realized that Lisa and the 7 other children selected yesterday were scheduled to board tomorrow's transport ship, not for spiritual instruction, but for sale to off-world buyers who collected exotic alien servants. He had less than 18 hours to prevent 8 children from disappearing into systematic exploitation that everyone in authority had been paid to ignore. Dawn at New Kepler spaceport brought the mechanical efficiency of routine transport operations, with cargo loading and passenger processing following schedules that had operated without incident for years. Marcus arrived early, his anthropologist credentials providing access to observation areas where he could monitor departure procedures while planning intervention that might save 8 children from systematic exploitation. The transport ship, Meridian's Pride, waited at Docking Bay 7, its crew completing pre-flight operations with professional indifference to cargo that included both legitimate passengers and what Marcus now understood was human trafficking disguised as cultural exchange. Dr. Reed, Dr. Vasquez called as she approached with obvious concern, "I understand you've been asking questions about today's passenger manifest." Such inquiries could be interpreted as cultural interference with protected Cylon religious practices. Dr. Vasquez, I need to show you evidence that the choosing ceremonies involve systematic child trafficking rather than religious education, Marcus replied, producing the data chip Morrison had provided. The children departing today aren't going to spiritual institutions, they're being sold to off-world buyers. That's an extremely serious accusation. Do you have proof beyond circumstantial evidence and linguistic interpretation? Communication intercepts, financial transaction records, and transport documentation showing that selected children travel under false credentials to destinations with no connection to Cylon religious organizations. Dr. Vasquez reviewed the data with growing alarm, her expression shifting from bureaucratic caution to genuine horror as she processed evidence of corruption that extended throughout colonial administration. These transaction records, she said slowly, indicate payments to Administrator Williams, Security Chief Peterson, and Cultural Affairs Director Hayes. The amount suggests systematic bribery rather than legitimate administrative fees. The communications between Elder Kethmani and off-world collection coordinators discuss quality assessments and delivery schedules. They're treating children like inventory for commercial transaction. Dr. Reed, if this evidence is accurate, we're looking at criminal conspiracy that threatens both human-Cylon relations and basic protection standards for vulnerable populations. Before Marcus could respond, announcement systems throughout the spaceport declared final boarding for departing passengers. Through the observation windows, he could see 8 small figures being escorted toward the transport by individuals wearing official Cylon religious robes. "That's them," Marcus said, recognizing Lisa's distinctive silver-flecked skin among the group. "Those children are about to be shipped off-world for sale to buyers who collect exotic alien servants." Dr. Vasquez activated her emergency communication system, contacting Colonial Security with urgent requests for transport departure delay pending investigation of trafficking allegations. However, her calls were met with administrative resistance that suggested the corruption extended beyond the officials already identified. Security Chief Peterson claims jurisdiction over silent diplomatic departures, she reported after several unsuccessful attempts to halt boarding procedures. He's refusing to delay departure without court orders that would require days to obtain. Marcus realized that official channels had been compromised by the same corruption that enabled the trafficking operation. Dr. Vasquez, if those children board that transport, they disappear into systematic exploitation that's been operating for years. We need direct intervention rather than procedural compliance. What kind of direct intervention? Public confrontation that forces acknowledgement of what's actually happening. Criminal conspiracies depend on secrecy, exposure eliminates their operational effectiveness. Marcus walked toward the boarding area with determination that surprised him, his academic background providing unexpected courage when faced with institutional corruption that endangered vulnerable children. Dr. Vasquez followed, her cultural liaison credentials providing authority that would make their intervention more difficult to dismiss. Elder Kethmani, Marcus called in fluent Silan as the religious leader supervised the children's boarding process. I need to discuss the spiritual institutions where these blessed children will receive advanced religious education. The elder's expression showed surprise at being addressed directly in his native language by a human researcher, though he maintained ceremonial composure while responding in standard Galactic for the benefit of observing officials. The sacred sites are maintained according to ancient tradition, Kethmani replied carefully. Human observers are not permitted access to preserve spiritual sanctity. Then perhaps you can explain, Marcus continued in Silan, why your communications with collection coordinators discuss pricing negotiations and delivery schedules for children you describe as spiritually blessed. The direct accusation in Silan created stunned silence among the boarding party, who hadn't expected human interference in what they believed was a secure criminal operation. Furthermore, Marcus said, switching to Standard Galactic to ensure all present could understand, transport manifests show these children traveling under false diplomatic credentials to destinations with no documented connection to Silan religious organizations. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her official position lending authority to Marcus's accusations. Colonial Security is investigating evidence of systematic child trafficking disguised as religious practice. This departure is suspended pending comprehensive review of passenger credentials and destination verification. You have no authority to interfere with protected cultural practices, Security Chief Peterson interrupted, arriving with obvious intent to prevent disruption of the trafficking operation he'd been paid to protect. We have authority to investigate criminal activity, Dr. Vasquez replied, and evidence indicates these children are being trafficked for sale to off-world buyers rather than transported for legitimate religious education. The confrontation attracted increasing attention from spaceport personnel and other passengers, creating exactly the public exposure that criminal conspiracies couldn't survive. Marcus watched Lisa's face, seeing hope replace terror as she realized that someone was finally questioning the lies that had masked her abduction. The evidence is comprehensive, Marcus announced to the growing crowd of observers. Financial records, communication intercepts, and transport documentation proving systematic child trafficking operating for over 5 years under cover of supposed religious practices. Elder Kethmani attempted to maintain the deception, but his nervous responses to direct questions in Silan revealed knowledge of criminal operations that extended far beyond spiritual responsibilities. Under pressure from public scrutiny and documented evidence, the trafficking network began collapsing as corrupt officials attempted to distance themselves from exposure. The resolution came swiftly once public attention made continued denial impossible. The 8 children were removed from the transport and placed in protective custody while Colonial Security conducted arrests that ultimately exposed trafficking operations extending across multiple worlds. Marcus's anthropological research had revealed systematic criminal exploitation disguised as cultural respect, leading to reforms that prioritized child welfare over diplomatic convenience. Lisa and the other rescued children became symbols of the importance of questioning cultural practices when they harm vulnerable populations. 6 months later, Marcus continued his research under new protocols that balanced cultural sensitivity with protection standards, while Lisa attended school with other silent children who would never again face selection for supposed spiritual blessing that masked systematic exploitation. The truth, once exposed, had indeed unraveled everything, including the lies that enabled predators to hide behind cultural protection laws.